All right, let's dive into one of the most intriguing and mysterious ideas in the Warhammer 40K universe. The notion that there are Imperial forces, once loyal to the Emperor and the Imperium, who have willingly, or unwillingly, fled to the far side of the galaxy. It's a bold, almost unfathomable move, right? To leave everything they knew behind, to abandon the light of Terra and the ever-watchful gaze of the Emperor's throne. But what would drive a force, be it a Space Marine chapter, a regiment of Imperial Guard, or perhaps even a faction of the Adeptus Mechanicus, to make such an extreme choice? The far side of the galaxy is not some innocuous, uncharted region. This is a place beyond the reach of the Imperium's rule, a vast and perilous void. If these Imperial forces truly exist, they would be living in the shadow of the most remote, unexplored corners of the galaxy, far from the towering spires of the Emperor's eternal empire. What would be so important to them that they would risk living in exile, cut off from their brethren and their Emperor? The implications of such a move are both thrilling and terrifying. In this video, we'll explore the possibility that there are indeed groups of exiled Imperial forces hidden away in the most distant, forgotten regions of space. Could there be chapters of Space Marines, whole regiments, or perhaps other factions of the Imperium that have disappeared from the annals of history? Why would they leave? What would their lives be like now, far from the Imperium they once served? And perhaps most importantly, what does it mean for the galaxy? If such groups exist, what is their role in the ever-twisting fate of the Imperium? Let's embark on this journey into the unknown and uncover the secrets of the Black Exiles. The Imperium of Man, as vast as it is, stretches its tendrils across the stars, encompassing countless worlds, systems, and civilizations. This sprawling empire, built on the backs of the Emperor's indomitable will and the sacrifices of untold billions, stands as a testament to human resilience. It is a galaxy-spanning beast, ever-expanding, ever-reaching, but also, paradoxically, perpetually strained by the weight of its own scale. The Imperium's territories stretch so far that some worlds are isolated from the greater whole, left to fend for themselves, sometimes for centuries or even millennia, without direct contact from the high authorities of Terra. And in those deep corners of the galaxy, far from the watchful eyes of the Emperor's golden throne, anything can happen. Imagine for a moment a distant Imperial fleet, its vast ships cutting through the void of space, heading toward the farthest edges of known space. These ships might have been launched during the Great Crusade, sent to explore, conquer, and bring more of the galaxy under Imperial rule. But as time passed, as the Imperium's reach became more fractured, these distant fleets were left to grow forgotten, their missions once vital, but now lost in the annals of history. With no communications, no resupply from Terra, and no guidance from the Administratum, how long would it take before they lost their connection to the Imperium's heart? It's easy to imagine how soldiers, generals, and even entire fleets could find themselves out of reach, isolated in the vastness of the galaxy. The galaxy is, after all, not a neatly organized system of clearly defined borders. The Imperium's control is a patchwork, held together more by willpower and old treaties than by any effective system of governance. These lost forces, far from the Emperor's light, could very well have drifted into the uncharted reaches, so far removed from the Imperium's core that the idea of returning might have seemed as impossible as reaching the farthest stars. And what about the soldiers themselves? The Imperium's armies, whether the grizzled veterans of the Astra Militarum or the genetically engineered warriors of the Adeptus Astartes, are bound by an unwavering loyalty to their cause and their Emperor. But distance, time, and the harsh realities of the galaxy can chip away at even the most steadfast of loyalties. In the cold expanse of space, far from the watchful eyes of Terra, what would happen to these men and women? Would they remain steadfast, their faith in the Emperor unshaken, or would they begin to question the very foundations of their existence? The idea of them breaking away, exiling themselves to the far side of the galaxy, becomes less far-fetched when you consider the sheer scale of the Imperium's reach, and the isolation that comes with it. The far side of the galaxy is a realm that the Imperium rarely speaks of. It is a place where the Emperor's light fades into shadow, a zone where even the might of the Imperial fleets struggles to maintain a foothold. To the Imperium's leadership, the far reaches of the galaxy are seen as a distant frontier, a place for the most extreme outposts and military bases. These worlds, scattered on the outer rim, are often disregarded, considered little more than footnotes in the grand scheme of the Imperium's expansion. And yet, for those who live in these regions, the far side is home, far from the bureaucratic red tape of the administratum, from the political maneuverings of Terra, and perhaps most importantly from the watchful eyes of the Inquisition. Some fan theories suggest that these distant areas could serve as hiding spots for those Imperial forces who have gone rogue, perhaps even turning their backs on the Imperium. After all, even the most devout of soldiers might find themselves disillusioned after decades of isolation, especially when the weight of the Imperium's endless wars and the apathy of Terra's leaders becomes too much to bear. These worlds, forgotten by the Imperium's core, could easily harbor the last remnants of disgraced chapters, regiments lost to time, or even those who, disillusioned by the Imperium's endless cruelty and oppression, have decided to make their own way in the galaxy. What kind of world would they create in the isolation of the far side? Could they maintain the Emperor's vision, or would they evolve into something entirely new, something unrecognizable to the Imperium they once served? The perception of the far side of the galaxy within the Imperium itself is crucial to understanding why such forces might have fled there in the first place. To the high command of the Imperium, it is a place of last resort, a forgotten wilderness where the light of civilization struggles to survive. But to those who would venture there, it is also a place of freedom. Freedom from the laws of the Imperium, from the chains of bureaucracy, from the endless wars that plague the galaxy. It is a space where, perhaps, a new identity could form. And as the Imperium's hold on the galaxy weakens and more of its resources are stretched thin, the allure of this far-off realm grows stronger. Yet, this move isn't without its dangers. While the far side may seem like an escape, it's not a peaceful haven. These regions are still part of a galaxy at war, filled with Xenos, hostile factions, and the ever-present threat of chaos. Any Imperial force venturing too far from Terra would not only be at the mercy of these threats, but they would also have to contend with the potential wrath of the Imperium itself should they ever be discovered. The far side, for all its allure, is a place of uncertainty, and the consequences of exile could be devastating for those who make the leap. So, could there really be Imperial forces hiding in the far reaches of the galaxy? Could the vastness of the Imperium's control, its sprawling patchwork nature, really allow such an exodus to occur? The answer, as we'll continue to explore, is more complicated than it first appears. But one thing is for sure: the possibility of exiled Imperial forces in the far side of the galaxy opens up a whole new chapter in the already complex and layered story of Warhammer 40K. The seeds of this story have already been sown, and the galaxy's darkest corners may hold the answers we've been searching for. When we think about Space Marines, we usually imagine unwavering loyalty, unbreakable bonds, and oaths made to the Emperor himself. These are the Emperor's chosen warriors, genetically engineered to be perfect soldiers, bred to serve the Imperium until their last breath. So, the idea of a chapter of Space Marines abandoning their oaths, turning their backs on the Imperium, and fleeing to the farthest corners of the galaxy seems almost sacrilegious. How could such an iconic part of the Imperium, so rooted in the Emperor's vision, ever choose exile over loyalty? Could Space Marine chapters really turn away from the Imperium? And if so, what could drive them to make such a decision? The very thought of a Space Marine chapter leaving the Imperium is almost blasphemous. After all, these warriors are the Emperor's sword and shield, the eternal guardians of humanity, bound by a sacred duty to protect the Imperium and its people. It's difficult to fathom that a chapter of these superhuman soldiers, with their unshakable loyalty and centuries of service, would ever abandon their mission. But if we step away from the dogma for a moment and look at the broader picture, there are cracks in the Imperium that could force a chapter to consider fleeing. Imagine, if you will, a chapter that has seen the depths of the Imperium's corruption and cruelty. Perhaps they were called to fight in a crusade only to find their brothers being used as pawns in a political game of the administratum, their oaths twisted and manipulated by those in power. Or perhaps they witnessed the Imperium's disregard for its people, the same people they were sworn to protect, being sacrificed in the name of a greater good that they no longer believed in. This could break a Space Marine chapter. It's easy to imagine how, after centuries of following orders, some chapters might find themselves disillusioned by the very system they were created to defend. It's not hard to see how some Space Marines might start questioning their place in the galaxy. The Imperium, for all its grand ideals and promises of unity, is a broken system. A system that demands sacrifice, that asks for unthinking loyalty, even when the cost is the lives of the very citizens the Imperium is meant to protect. Some chapters might look at their oaths, made in a time when the Emperor was alive and guiding them, and realize that the Imperium they serve today is not the Imperium they swore to protect. It's a decaying empire, led by bureaucrats, warlords, and corrupt officials who have long since abandoned the Emperor's vision. Fan theories often speculate that these disillusioned chapters might decide that they can no longer serve the Imperium. The idea of a chapter of Space Marines fleeing into the far reaches of the galaxy isn't so far-fetched. The Imperium is a vast empire, and not every corner of it is under the direct watch of Terra. The galaxy is filled with uncharted systems, worlds on the very edge of known space, and it's not hard to imagine that some chapters might decide to disappear into the unknown, to seek freedom from the Imperium's shackles, to carve out their own destiny in a galaxy that doesn't bend to the will of Terra. One theory that has been thrown around is that the Lost Legions could be among these exiles. We know that there are entire chapters of Space Marines whose fate remains a mystery. The 2nd and 11th Legions were erased from Imperial records, their history erased from the Great Book of the Imperium. What if these missing legions didn't just disappear? They chose to leave. Perhaps they saw the writing on the wall and decided that their only chance at survival was to flee to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, away from the chaos and decay of the Imperium. What if, after all these millennia, they're still out there, living in exile, far from the Emperor's light? The consequences of such a move would be staggering. Space Marines, even those who choose to leave the Imperium, are still incredibly powerful forces. The strength of a Space Marine chapter is not easily matched, even by other Imperial forces. If a chapter of Space Marines were to rebel and flee, it would leave the Imperium with a dangerous and unpredictable force lurking in the depths of the galaxy. A force that knows the inner workings of the Imperium, understands its strategies, and has the might to take on Imperial fleets. The risk of this group growing in power and becoming a new threat to the Imperium would be a terrifying prospect for the Emperor's commanders. Some fan theories suggest that these rogue Space Marines could form their own alliances, perhaps even with factions that the Imperium would consider enemies, like the Eldar or the Tau. While the idea of a Space Marine chapter working alongside Xenos might seem impossible, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. A chapter that has broken its ties with the Imperium might see these former enemies as potential allies, especially if the Imperium itself becomes a greater threat than the alien forces that it once fought against. But not all exiles would necessarily become enemies of the Imperium. Some might simply want to survive, to escape the endless wars, to find a place where they can live in peace, away from the endless cycle of violence. These chapters could form their own worlds, create their own societies, and rebuild themselves in the farthest reaches of space, far from the corrupting influence of Terra. Perhaps they would even try to hold true to their original oaths, but without the Imperium to guide them, without the Emperor's light to show them the way, how long could they maintain that loyalty? Would they be able to keep their honor intact, or would they, too, become corrupted by the vast emptiness of the galaxy? The very idea of space marines fleeing the Imperium opens up a whole new world of possibilities. It's a fascinating and terrifying concept that challenges our understanding of what it means to be a space marine. Are they just loyal servants of the Imperium, or are they more than that? Could they, too, feel the crushing weight of the galaxy's darkness and seek something more than endless war? Only time and the mysteries of the galaxy will tell. The Inquisition, the shadowy organization that operates at the very heart of the Imperium, is perhaps one of the most feared entities in the entire galaxy. Made up of agents with near unlimited authority, the Inquisition is tasked with rooting out heresy, corruption, and threats to the Imperium's survival. These are the men and women who hold the power of life and death in their hands, whose decisions can shape the fate of entire worlds. But what happens when the very thing they are charged with protecting, loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium, begins to crumble? What if some of the Emperor's most loyal servants, the Space Marines or other Imperial forces, were to break away, fleeing into the depths of the galaxy? How would the Inquisition react? Could they play a role in this exile, hunting down these rogue factions? And how would they go about tracking such dangerous and powerful groups? It's easy to imagine the Inquisition's response to a Space Marine chapter or an Imperial force fleeing to the farthest corners of the galaxy. The Inquisition doesn't just hunt down the heretics, mutants, and xenos that plague the Imperium. It also polices the Imperium itself, ensuring that even its most powerful factions stay in line. In the eyes of the Inquisition, any force that strays from the Emperor's command, that dares to break its oaths, is a potential threat. These rogue elements, these exiled Imperial forces, would be seen as a direct challenge to the power of the Inquisition and the Emperor's throne itself. One can almost picture an Inquisitor, cold and calculating, receiving word of a Space Marine chapter's disappearance. The report would come in like a whisper at first, rumors of a chapter going rogue, taking a fleet into uncharted space, their very existence a mystery. The Inquisitor's mind would race with the possibilities. Could it be true? Could these warriors, once the Emperor's most loyal, now be plotting against the very throne they once swore to protect? And if they are out there, far in the unknown, what could they be planning? The Inquisition's job, above all, is to protect the Imperium from internal threats, no matter how powerful or far-reaching. And an exiled rogue Space Marine chapter is about as dangerous as it gets. So, how would the Inquisition go about tracking these exiled factions? It's not as if these rogue groups are going to make it easy. Space Marines, even those in exile, are still elite warriors. They know how to cover their tracks, how to hide in the vastness of space. And the far reaches of the galaxy are filled with cosmic anomalies, dense nebulae, and systems so far removed from the Imperium's watch that they could easily disappear without a trace. These exiles are not just hiding, they are trying to escape the very forces that should be hunting them. But the Inquisition, relentless in its pursuit of all that threatens the Imperium, would not rest. One theory that has circulated among fans is that the Inquisition might already know more than they let on about these rogue factions. The Inquisition is, after all, notorious for its secretive nature. They have their agents everywhere, infiltrating even the highest echelons of the Imperium. It's possible that some Inquisitors, whether out of duty or personal interest, have tracked these rogue forces, watching them from the shadows. But the real question is, why hasn't the Inquisition moved to eliminate them? Could it be that these exiles are being allowed to live, at least for now? Perhaps some Inquisitors see them as a necessary evil, a counterbalance to the growing corruption and chaos within the Imperium itself. Others may believe that these rogue forces could eventually become useful in the Imperium's endless war against the enemies of mankind. But what about the more radical factions within the Inquisition? The Ordo Hereticus, for example, might view these rogue factions as heretical to the very core. They would see any defection from the Imperium as a sign of treachery, and their methods would be swift, brutal, and unforgiving. They wouldn't hesitate to purge the galaxy of these exiles, even if it meant decimating entire systems. For them, the survival of the Imperium is paramount, and no betrayal, no matter how well-intentioned, could be tolerated. It's easy to imagine an inquisitor from the Ordo Hereticus leading a crusade to find these exiles, using every resource at their disposal, astropaths, spies, and entire fleets, to hunt them down. The sheer scale of the operation would be mind-boggling, but the Inquisition would stop at nothing to eliminate what they consider a threat. On the other hand, there are those within the Inquisition who might be more sympathetic to these rogue factions. The Ordo Xenos, for instance, might see these exiles as a potential ally in the war against the galaxy's many alien threats. These rogue space marines, with their military expertise and unmatched battle prowess, could be invaluable in dealing with the Imperium's enemies. Some fans even speculate that the Inquisition, in their never-ending quest for power, might secretly be trying to recruit these exiled factions for their own purposes, offering them a chance to survive in exchange for their loyalty. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that the Inquisition, in its pursuit of control, might make a dark bargain with these exiled forces, one that could change the fate of the Imperium forever. The logistics of tracking down these rogue factions would be no easy task. The Inquisition would need to rely on its vast network of spies, informants, and agents to gather intelligence. They would have to infiltrate the very corners of the galaxy where these exiles hide. They might use cryptic messages, encrypted transmissions, and even more nefarious means to track their movements. The Imperium's vast web of surveillance, from the astropathic network to the fleets of the Imperial Navy, would be deployed to monitor even the most remote regions of space. The exiles might think they are free, but the Inquisition's reach is long, and its patience is infinite. One of the most chilling possibilities is that the Inquisition could already have agents embedded within the ranks of these rogue factions. Perhaps over time, some of the Inquisition's own agents have been lured to join these exiled forces, either out of disillusionment with the Imperium or because of some personal connection. These double agents could be feeding information back to the Inquisition, making it possible for them to monitor the rogue factions even from afar. The exiles, unaware of the Inquisition's silent watch, could be playing into the hands of those they would most like to avoid. But at the end of the day, the question remains, how far would the Inquisition go to bring these exiles to justice? How much is the Imperium willing to sacrifice to maintain its control over its own soldiers? The Inquisition's role in the hunt for these rogue factions is one of the most compelling aspects of this mystery, and the possibilities are endless. Whether through direct confrontation, secret manipulation, or alliances with forces who have their own agendas, the Inquisition will always be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when they do, nothing can stand in their way. The mystery of the missing legions in Warhammer 40K is one of the darkest and most enigmatic corners of the lore. For the Imperium, it's an uncomfortable chapter in their history, a time when whole legions of space marines, their numbers and glory unmatched, disappeared without a trace. We know the names of these legions, but the details of their fate are shrouded in secrecy. The 2nd and 11th Legions were erased from all records, their histories deliberately expunged from the archives of the Imperium. What happened to them? Why were they erased from memory? And could they have simply been lost to the depths of space? Or worse, exiled, hidden away from the Emperor's light? Some fans speculate that these missing legions could have been lost or banished to the unknown regions of the galaxy, far beyond the reach of Terra and the Imperium. The idea is both chilling and fascinating. Imagine for a moment that the 2nd and 11th Legions didn't simply vanish. What if they were deliberately cast into exile, sent far beyond the edges of the Imperium, to a place where no one could find them? The vastness of the galaxy, after all, is almost incomprehensible. Even the most powerful fleet in the Imperium would be hard-pressed to patrol every star system, especially those on the outer edges of known space. And it's not just the 2nd and 11th Legions that are missing. There are numerous chapters of Space Marines whose fates are unknown. Could they have met similar ends? The thought that entire legions could be out there, living in exile, is one that captures the imagination and fuels countless fan theories. What could have driven these legions to leave, or be cast away? If we take the theory of exile seriously, it's possible that the Imperium, in its darkest days, found it necessary to hide these legions for some reason. Perhaps they were involved in something so dangerous, so devastating, that even the Emperor deemed them a threat. The idea of an entire legion going rogue or being tainted by chaos in some way is not entirely out of the question. After all, we know that the Horus Heresy nearly tore the Imperium apart. The forces of chaos were ever present, corrupting and seducing those who would listen. Perhaps these lost legions fell victim to that same temptation, and rather than risk their corruption spreading across the Imperium, the Emperor made the decision to send them away, far beyond the reach of the Imperium's enemies. On the other hand, some fans believe that these lost legions were simply abandoned by the Imperium, left to rot in the void. The Imperium is not a kind or merciful empire, and it's possible that these legions, for one reason or another, simply ceased to be useful. Perhaps they were deemed expendable, or perhaps their loyalty to the Emperor was called into question. There are rumors that some of the missing legions were involved in some kind of catastrophic failure, perhaps a failed crusade or a rebellion against their commanders. Whatever the cause, the idea that they were discarded, forgotten, and exiled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy paints a grim picture of the Imperium's willingness to throw away its own creations. The question that fans often debate is, could these missing legions still be out there, hidden in the depths of space, waiting to return? Could they have established their own society, far from the Imperium's grasp, building a new home in the most remote, unexplored regions of the galaxy? It's an enticing thought. After all, if these legions were not destroyed, if they survived in exile, what would they have become over the millennia? Could they have become something entirely different from the warriors they once were, perhaps a force in opposition to the Imperium they once served? There are theories that suggest these lost legions could have been scattered across the galaxy, their remnants living on in isolated worlds. They might have formed alliances with other, more obscure factions, perhaps even Xenos groups or forces who were once enemies of the Imperium. Could some of them have turned to chaos, like the traitor legions? Or would they have remained loyal, despite the distance from Terra? What would their culture look like now, after centuries of exile? Would they still honor the Emperor, or would they have developed their own code, far removed from the dogma of the Imperium? The concept of these lost legions being exiled to the unknown regions of the galaxy opens up a multitude of possibilities for storytelling. In some ways, it even makes them more fascinating than the traitor legions. The idea that these warriors, abandoned by their Emperor, could survive in the galaxy's darkest corners, in isolation, possibly even adapting and evolving in ways that the Imperium would never approve of, is compelling. They could be a shadowy mirror of the Imperium itself, a dark reflection of what could have been. For fans, the mystery of the lost legions is a tantalizing one. It speaks to the heart of the Warhammer 40K universe, a universe where secrets are buried, where the truth is hidden behind layers of propaganda, lies, and omission. The Imperium has always been a place of contradictions, a society that espouses loyalty and devotion to the Emperor while secretly harboring the seeds of betrayal and decay. The missing legions, with their erased histories and enigmatic fates, embody that contradiction perfectly. Were they cast away, or did they choose exile? What became of them? These questions remain unanswered, and that uncertainty is what makes them such a powerful part of the Warhammer 40K mythos. There's no shortage of fan theories surrounding these lost legions. Some believe they were corrupted by chaos and fled, hiding in the darkest corners of the galaxy, where even the most potent psychic signals couldn't reach them. Others think they were exiled as a result of political machinations within the Imperium, their leaders deemed a threat and cast aside to rot. Whatever the true story is, the idea that these warriors still live somewhere in the galaxy adds an exciting layer of mystery to the lore. And perhaps, one day, we'll learn the truth of what happened to the lost legions. Until then, they remain a haunting enigma in the darkness of the 41st millennium. The connection between the Eldar and Imperial forces is one that stretches back millennia, filled with both enmity and intrigue. On the one hand, the Eldar represent everything the Imperium stands against: ancient, alien, and seemingly beyond the reach of humanity. And yet, beneath the surface of their long-standing animosity, there are layers of mystery, and the possibility that Imperial forces could have sought refuge or even formed alliances with the Exiles, a faction of Eldar, is a thought that stirs up endless possibilities. Could the Eldar, with their secret knowledge and ancient wisdom, have influenced the decision of Imperial forces to flee into the unknown reaches of the galaxy? It's an intriguing question, one that ties into the deeper, darker elements of the Warhammer 40k universe. The Exodite worlds are some of the most enigmatic places in the galaxy, far from the reach of the Imperium and even the core of the Eldar race. These worlds, once populated by Eldar who fled the collapse of their empire, are often depicted as bastions of ancient wisdom and forgotten technology. The Exodites are not the ruling elite of the Eldar, nor are they the decadent, hedonistic Drukhari who seek power through pain and suffering. Instead, they are a more spiritual and isolated faction, living in harmony with the worlds they inhabit, holding on to the secrets of their ancient race while rejecting the excesses of their fallen brethren. Now, imagine if some of the Imperial forces, disillusioned by the corruption of the Imperium or betrayed by their superiors, found themselves seeking refuge with the Exodites. These Imperial forces might have turned to the Eldar for guidance, desperate to find a new path in a galaxy that seemed to be spiraling out of control. The Exodites, with their deep knowledge of the galaxy's hidden places, their connection to ancient pre-fall Eldar technology, and their long-standing desire to protect the last remnants of their race, could have provided a safe haven for those seeking to escape the Imperium's suffocating grasp. The idea of such an alliance between Imperial forces and the Exodites is not as far-fetched as it might seem. The Eldar, despite their aloofness and their often disdainful view of humanity, are not blind to the potential of powerful allies. They have seen the Imperium's might, its battleships, and its warriors, and they know that in a galaxy constantly teetering on the brink of destruction, even the most unlikely alliances can prove valuable. Could the Exodites, who are often portrayed as protectors of humanity, have seen something in the exiled Imperial forces that was worth saving? It's possible that, seeing the corruption and collapse of the Imperium, they might have decided to lend a hand, offering shelter and knowledge to these wandering soldiers, teaching them the ancient ways of their kind in return for their protection or their service. One theory that has been floated by fans is that the Exodites could have seen the potential for Imperial forces to play a role in the rebirth of their ancient civilizations. The Eldar, even the Exodites, are a dying race. Their numbers are dwindling, their ancient empire shattered, and the forces of chaos, orcs, and other threats press in on every side. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that the Exodites might have seen the Imperium as a last hope, a way to preserve their knowledge, their culture, and their way of life. Perhaps these exiled Imperial forces, whether out of desperation or mutual interest, made the decision to join forces with the Exodites in order to protect the secrets of their past and safeguard the future of the galaxy. The question of ancient knowledge plays a central role in this potential alliance. The Exodites, being the descendants of the Eldar who left the decadent core of their race, likely possess knowledge that even the Imperium would covet. The technology of the Eldar, with its precision and sophistication, is far beyond anything the Imperium can replicate. The Exodites, having lived for so long in isolation, would have had access to the forgotten ruins of their ancestors, places where the power of the Eldar gods and their technologies still linger, just waiting to be rediscovered. Could the Imperial forces who fled to the far side of the galaxy have been driven, at least in part, by the desire to uncover and harness this knowledge? The potential to wield the secrets of the Eldar, secrets that could turn the tide in the Imperium's eternal war against its enemies, might have been too tempting to resist. Furthermore, the Exiles are known to be protectors of their worlds, fiercely guarding them against any threats. Could they have seen the presence of the Imperium's forces as a way to bolster their defenses against the ever-present dangers of the galaxy? The Imperium, with its vast military might and its highly trained soldiers, could have provided the Exiles with the muscle they needed to protect their sacred worlds. And in return, the Exiles could have shared their wisdom, ancient secrets that the Imperium had long forgotten. This exchange could have been the foundation of a hidden alliance, one that allowed the exiled Imperial forces to carve out a place for themselves in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Of course, not all theories about the Exiles and the Imperium are as hopeful. There are some who speculate that the relationship between these two groups might not have been one of mutual respect, but rather one of manipulation. Perhaps the Exiles saw these exiled Imperial forces as a tool to further their own agenda, using them as pawns in a larger game. The Exiles, like all Eldar, are incredibly cunning and strategic, and they would not hesitate to use their new allies to further their own goals. In this scenario, the Imperium's exiles might have been betrayed, used as instruments of a plan that they could never fully comprehend. Whatever the truth may be, the connection between the Eldar, especially the Exiles, and the Imperial forces that fled is a tantalizing one. It speaks to the complexity of the Warhammer 40K universe, where alliances are often formed for reasons that are not always clear, and where the lines between friend and foe are often blurred. The idea that Imperial forces could have found refuge with the Exiles, hidden away in the far reaches of the galaxy, offers endless possibilities for exploration. Could they still be out there, hidden in the darkest corners of space, their secrets safe with the Exiles? Or have they long since been lost to time, their knowledge and their fate fading into myth? Only the galaxy knows the answer, and it may be a mystery that remains unsolved for centuries to come. The Adeptus Mechanicus, with its vast repositories of ancient knowledge and boundless technological expertise, is one of the most mysterious and intriguing factions in the Imperium. Known for their worship of the machine god and their obsession with knowledge and technology, the Mechanicus holds power far beyond what most realize. Their role within the Imperium is often seen as that of a servile engineer, tirelessly maintaining the war machines and technologies that power the Emperor's armies. However, beneath their servitude lies a much darker and more ambitious undercurrent. It's not hard to imagine that elements within the Mechanicus, those who are privy to forbidden knowledge and the arcane secrets of ancient technology, could have seen fit to flee to the distant reaches of the galaxy. What if the Adeptus Mechanicus, with their hidden plans and advanced technology, had a secret agenda that led them to abandon the Imperium's core and retreat to the farthest corners of space? The Mechanicus has always operated under its own rules, guided by the belief that knowledge, especially technological knowledge, is sacred. Their quest for lost secrets, for the hidden truths of the dark age of technology, has led them down paths that many within the Imperium would consider heretical. They are not bound by the same morality or ideals that govern the rest of the Imperium. Their loyalty is to the machine god first and foremost, and their pursuit of knowledge often supersedes their fealty to Terra. It's this obsession with technology that might have ultimately driven parts of the Mechanicus to seek refuge in the far reaches of the galaxy, far from the prying eyes of the Imperium and its increasingly stagnant bureaucracy. Fan theories often speculate about the Mechanicus's hidden motives and the possibility that they've taken refuge in the galaxy's most remote and uncharted regions. The galaxy is vast, and while the Imperium's resources are spread thin across its many worlds, the Mechanicus is perhaps one of the only factions within the Imperium capable of surviving, indeed thriving, far from the support of Terra. Could a faction within the Mechanicus have seen the Imperium's endless wars, its its growing corruption and the slow erosion of its values as a sign that the time had come for them to withdraw? Some theorists believe that certain factions of the Mechanicus, disillusioned by the political turmoil on Mars and the centralization of power in the hands of Terra, might have decided that the only way to preserve their sacred knowledge was to take it into exile. In the vast, unexplored reaches of the galaxy, the Mechanicus would find the freedom to continue their work without the interference of the Administratum or the Inquisition. These distant regions could offer the solitude and secrecy needed to unlock the lost technologies of the Dark Age, and while the Imperium might see these regions as worthless and inhospitable, the Mechanicus would see them as treasure troves of untapped knowledge. It's entirely possible that elements of the Mechanicus fled to these areas not just to survive, but to thrive, gathering forbidden knowledge, rediscovering lost technologies, and perhaps even seeking to establish a new technological empire that could rival the Imperium itself. The Mechanicus's vast knowledge of ancient technologies, particularly those from the Dark Age of technology, is one of the greatest secrets of the Imperium. Their ability to reverse engineer Xenos tech, their mastery of the STC, Standard Template Construct System, and their understanding of machine life forms are just a few examples of the power they hold. But what if this knowledge has led them to more dangerous paths, ones that even the Emperor himself could never have anticipated? The Mechanicus has always been a faction of both zealots and pragmatists, and it's not difficult to imagine that over the millennia, some members of the Mechanicus have strayed far from the Emperor's light, choosing instead to embrace the potential of forbidden technologies. Could there be factions of the Mechanicus that have secretly aligned themselves with Xenos races or even Chaos in their pursuit of this ancient technology? The Mechanicus is known to be a faction that operates in the shadows, their motives often hidden behind layers of secrecy. Their relationship with the Adeptus Astartes, for example, is one of necessity, but not necessarily loyalty. The Mechanicus might cooperate with the Space Marines in the maintenance of their war gear, but the heart of their true ambitions lies in their own experiments and goals. If the Imperium were to ever learn the full extent of the Mechanicus's secret projects, it's possible that they would be branded as heretics. But the Mechanicus might have already prepared for such an eventuality. If we look at the potential for a Mechanicus faction to take refuge in the far reaches of the galaxy, it becomes clear that their advanced technology and insatiable hunger for knowledge would be the driving forces behind such a move. They wouldn't go into exile because they were defeated or cornered. They would do so because they felt it was the only way to preserve their pursuit of the machine god's will, their pursuit of knowledge, and their desire to unlock the full potential of humanity's greatest creation: technology. These factions could have even gone so far as to establish secret enclaves in forgotten systems, hidden from the Imperium, where they could continue their work without interference. One theory that arises from this idea is the notion of hidden Mechanicus fleets, vessels that have long since vanished from Imperial records, moving in the darkest corners of the galaxy. These fleets could be home to entire Mechanicus worlds, where technology is worshipped and advanced without the burden of Imperial oversight. These worlds, secluded and isolated, could be the birthplace of new technologies that the Mechanicus might eventually use to either strengthen the Imperium or, in the case of a betrayal, wage war against it. Some believe that these worlds, along with their fleets, are not just hiding, they are waiting, gathering power and knowledge for some unknown purpose. Could the Mechanicus have used their advanced technology to escape the Imperium's grasp entirely? They are masters of the void, capable of traversing the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds and navigating through the warp with an unparalleled understanding of the universe's hidden laws. It is not beyond the realm of possibility that they could have established themselves in regions of space that are completely cut off from the Imperium, beyond the reach of even the most potent astropaths. In such a scenario, the Mechanicus would be free to continue their work, unbothered by the political and military struggles of the Imperium, slowly building an empire of knowledge and power in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the galaxy. The more we look at the possibility of the Mechanicus taking refuge in the far reaches of the galaxy, the more it seems like a natural fit for this enigmatic faction. The Mechanicus is, above all, a faction driven by secrets and ambition. The farthest corners of the galaxy, those places that others have long since abandoned or forgotten, are places that would attract the Mechanicus like moths to a flame. Here they could continue their work undisturbed, gathering knowledge, perfecting technology, and perhaps even creating a new world where the machine god's will can be carried out without the interference of the Imperium's crumbling bureaucracy. In the end, the true motivations of the Mechanicus remain shrouded in mystery. But one thing is clear. Their plans are vast, their ambitions endless, and their ability to vanish into the shadows of the galaxy unmatched. The concept of exile in the Warhammer 40K universe is a heavy, almost tragic one. The Imperium, for all its grandeur and might, is also a place of immense pressure, political machinations, and unyielding demands. To be part of the Imperium is to be caught in an unending struggle where the weight of loyalty, duty, and survival constantly hangs over every soldier, every general, every warrior of the Emperor. But what happens when the very forces who are meant to defend the Imperium find themselves pushed to the point of no return, forced to make a choice: exile or escape? Could it be that some Imperial forces, whether through political pressure or military strife, chose to leave the Imperium not out of a desire for freedom but as a last resort, a way to survive? Is it voluntary exile, or were these forces forced to escape due to circumstances beyond their control? At the heart of the matter is the understanding that the Imperium, despite its vastness and its unyielding grip on the galaxy, is not a place of stability for all its inhabitants. The Emperor's vision, so carefully crafted, has been eroded over the millennia. The bureaucracy of the Administratum, the endless demands of the Imperial Guard, the ever-present threat of the Inquisition. These are the forces that shape the lives of Imperial soldiers and officers, leaving them little room for personal choice. The Imperium is, in many ways, a machine designed for war, for conquest, and for survival, but not necessarily for the well-being or autonomy of those who serve within it. For some Imperial forces, the crushing weight of these demands might have become unbearable. A Space Marine chapter, once dedicated to the Emperor's cause, could easily find itself torn between the harsh realities of endless war and the realization that their loyalty to the Imperium has become a burden too great to bear. The constant campaigns, the endless losses, the political infighting that hampers any true progress. These could all serve as factors that push a chapter to the brink. Over time, perhaps they began to question their purpose. What was the point of sacrificing so much, of giving everything to a cause that seemed to be perpetually at war with itself? For many, the turning point might have come when they realized that the Emperor's vision was no longer attainable, when they saw the Imperium not as a beacon of hope, but as a crumbling empire that cared more about maintaining its facade than actually protecting humanity. The idea of voluntary exile arises here. The notion that these forces, having seen the decay within the Imperium, made a conscious decision to leave. They could have turned their backs on Terra and fled, seeking refuge in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, hoping that by doing so, they could preserve their honor, their ideals, and their very existence. The question is, though, whether this decision was truly voluntary. Could these exiled forces, disillusioned by their experience in the Imperium, have made the choice to escape as a form of liberation, to break free from the corruption that had slowly poisoned their ranks? Or were they pushed into exile by forces beyond their control, driven to leave as a means of survival rather than a conscious decision to abandon their oath? One theory that has circulated among fans is that the Imperium, especially in its later years, became increasingly intolerant of any deviation from the status quo. The Emperor's will, once the guiding force of the Imperium, had been replaced by a system that valued power and political gain over true service to humanity. Could it be that some chapters of Space Marines found themselves caught in a political struggle, their ideals clashing with the growing power of the Imperium's bureaucracy? The threat of being deemed heretical, of being branded as traitors to the Emperor's vision, could have pushed these chapters to the brink. Faced with the option of either being destroyed by the very empire they swore to protect or seeking refuge in the farthest corners of the galaxy. It's not hard to see how some of them might have chosen escape over certain destruction. The notion of forced escape also raises interesting possibilities. The Imperium, despite its sprawling reach, is not invincible. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and many Imperial forces are spread thin, left to defend far-flung worlds with little to no support. Imagine for a moment that an entire regiment of Imperial Guard, or even a fleet of battle-hardened Marines, found themselves cut off, stranded on a distant world or in a corner of the galaxy that the Imperium could not easily reach. With no hope of reinforcement and no way to communicate with Terra, these forces would be left with few options. They could either perish in obscurity or attempt to escape, to find a way to survive on their own terms, far from the Imperium's grasp. Forced to make a choice between serving a decaying empire or seeking a life of uncertain freedom, these soldiers might have chosen the latter, fleeing to the unknown. The consequences of such a decision would be profound. For one, the act of fleeing would not be taken lightly by the Imperium. Exile, even voluntary exile, is viewed as a form of betrayal by the Imperium's leadership. The Emperor's soldiers are supposed to fight to the last, to serve until their final breath. The idea of abandoning that duty, of turning away from the Imperium's cause, is anathema to everything the Imperium stands for. For these exiled forces, the consequences would likely be severe. They would be hunted, branded as traitors, and their very existence would be erased from Imperial records. To flee would mean a life on the run, hunted by the Imperium itself. But what if this exile was not a choice? What if these forces were forced into a position where escape was the only way to preserve their lives and their honor? The galaxy, after all, is full of dangers. Chaos, Xenos, and other threats lurk at every corner. The Imperium's enemies would be quick to exploit any weakness, and in a time when the Imperium is stretched thin and its leaders grow more corrupt, even loyal soldiers might find themselves expendable. If an Imperial force were to be abandoned, left to fend for itself in the face of overwhelming odds, would they not seek escape as a last resort? The question becomes not whether they would flee, but rather how long they could survive without the might of the Imperium behind them. Fan theories about these exiled forces often revolve around the idea that they didn't just disappear, they adapted. They found new ways to survive, forming alliances with other factions, using their knowledge of the Imperium's war machines to carve out a new existence in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Some believe they could have allied with Xenos forces, not out of any ideological alignment, but for sheer survival. Others think that these exiles could have become mercenaries, selling their services to the highest bidder, perhaps even becoming a force that exists in the shadows, working behind the scenes of galactic conflicts. In the end, the question of whether these Imperial forces fled voluntarily or were forced into escape is one that remains unanswered, a mystery that only deepens the complexity of their fate. Whether by choice or by necessity, their exile is a powerful statement about the state of the Imperium, about the forces that shape its soldiers, and about the struggles that even the most loyal of warriors might face in a galaxy that is constantly at war with itself. Exile, in this case, is not just about fleeing from the Imperium. It's about seeking something greater than the broken system they were once part of. It's about survival, and it's about hope, however fleeting, that there's something beyond the Emperor's decaying empire. If these Imperial forces, having fled to the far reaches of the galaxy, managed to establish their own society, it would undoubtedly be unlike anything the Imperium could ever envision. Far from the Emperor's light and free from the oppressive laws of Terra, this society would need to find a new purpose, new ideals, and perhaps most importantly, a new way to define loyalty, honor, and survival. The very act of exile speaks to a profound disillusionment with the Imperium. So, What would these exiled factions become, and what kind of society would they build in the shadows of the galaxy? The first thing that comes to mind is that such a society would be fiercely independent, shaped by the harsh realities of life in the galaxy's uncharted territories. These forces, whether they be Space Marines, Astra Militarum regiments, or even Adeptus Mechanicus factions, would have had to adapt quickly to their new environment. The isolation they'd find themselves in would make them self-reliant, with no support from the Imperium or its vast network of resources. They would be survivors, first and foremost. Gone would be the pomp and ceremony of Imperial hierarchy, the endless supply lines and reinforcement fleets. These exiled groups would be masters of pragmatism, operating in the cold expanse of space where every decision could mean life or death. They would build their society from the ground up, not based on the lofty ideals of the Imperium, but on the harsh truths of survival in a galaxy teeming with danger. What would this society look like? In many ways, it would reflect the flaws and virtues of its founders. On one hand, there would be a fierce loyalty to one another. The bonds between these exiled forces would be unbreakable, forged in the fires of abandonment and survival. Their shared experiences of betrayal, isolation, and escape would create a bond stronger than any Imperial oath, and their society would likely be one of close-knit communities, each warrior and leader knowing that their very survival depended on the unity of the whole. The Emperor's grand vision, for all its grandeur, never accounted for the reality of warfare and suffering, and this new society, shaped by the scars of their past, would understand that in ways the Imperium never could. But this loyalty to each other might come at a cost. The very act of exile could lead to a society that is inward-looking, perhaps even paranoid. These exiled forces would be acutely aware of the dangers that lurk in the galaxy, both from within and without. They would have no illusions about the forces of chaos, the Xenos, or the endless wars that plague the galaxy. As such, their society might evolve into something more authoritarian, where trust is earned and everyone knows their place, but where fear also plays a major role in maintaining order. A society built on survival would need to be pragmatic, and in the harsh conditions of the far side of the galaxy, pragmatism might soon turn into something darker. Would these forces over time begin to justify any action, no matter how brutal or ruthless, in the name of self-preservation? It's not hard to see how the very survival of this society could come to justify moral compromises that would be unthinkable under the Imperium's rule. There's also the possibility that this new society could evolve into something entirely different. The forces that fled the Imperium were already shaped by years of conflict and sacrifice, and the horrors they witnessed within the Imperium might have left them with a deep mistrust of the Emperor's vision. They might have come to see the Imperium not as a beacon of hope, but as a crumbling, oppressive regime that clung to a past that no longer served the needs of the galaxy. In the isolation of the far reaches, these exiled forces could form their own ideology, one that sought to preserve what was best about the Imperium, the loyalty, the honor, the bravery, but without the endless wars, the corruption, and the fanatical devotion to a dying emperor. They could become a society that values freedom and self-determination, perhaps even rejecting the religious dogma of the Imperium in favor of a more rational, scientific approach to governance. One interesting theory is that these exiled forces might even begin to experiment with new forms of government, not unlike the way the Adeptus Mechanicus sought to build their own power structure, separate from the Imperium's control. Without the stranglehold of Terra's bureaucracy, these exiles could have the freedom to create their own institutions, grounded in practicality rather than dogma. They might form a meritocratic society where individuals are valued for their ability to contribute to the community's survival rather than their rank or pedigree. Leaders could be chosen based on their skills and their ability to inspire loyalty rather than being imposed by an impersonal bureaucracy. This could be an incredibly radical departure from the Imperium's traditional structure, and it's not hard to imagine that such a society would attract others, perhaps even those from outside the Imperium, who were seeking something different. But what factions might these exiles have become? Would they form into something like a new chapter of Space Marines, fiercely independent but still carrying the ideals of their lost legion? Or would they break down into smaller, more fragmented groups, each carving out their own niche in the galaxy's wild frontier? Some fans speculate that they might even develop a new form of warrior culture, one that blends the old Imperial traditions with the new realities of exile. They could retain the discipline and strength of their military heritage, but adapt it to a more fluid, dynamic approach to warfare and governance. They might also turn to the old, forgotten technologies of the Dark Age of technology, experimenting with advanced weapons, machines, and even AI in ways that the Imperium would consider heretical. The potential for innovation in this society is immense, and it's easy to imagine them forging a path that neither the Imperium nor the forces of chaos could have anticipated. In terms of goals, the exiled factions would likely seek to carve out a place for themselves in the galaxy. But what would that place look like? Would they attempt to remain hidden, content to stay in the shadows and survive, or would they eventually seek to build something more? Perhaps their goals would be a mix of both. First, survival, and then, when they felt strong enough, a resurgence. They could use their advanced knowledge and new technologies to wage war on their enemies, or offer their services as mercenaries to those who seek power. Alternatively, they might seek to restore the Imperium itself, albeit in a new form, one that rejected the stagnation and corruption of Terra, but retained the strength and unity that had once made the Imperium great. Ultimately, this new society would be shaped by the scars of its past, but it would also be driven by a desire to escape the endless cycle of war and suffering that defines the Imperium. The exiled forces might never forget their origins, but they would have the freedom to chart their own course, to redefine what it means to be human in a galaxy that seems intent on tearing itself apart. In this way, the Exiles might become something that transcends the Imperium, a society forged not by the Emperor's vision, but by the harsh reality of survival in the farthest reaches of space. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where war rages and the tides of history shift like the stars themselves, there are stories, whispers, rumors, and legends that have been passed down through generations. These tales, often spoken in hushed voices in the dark corners of the Imperium, speak of forces that should not exist, of warriors who once stood as the Emperor's most loyal, only to vanish into the shadows of the galaxy. The exiled factions, those Imperial forces that fled the known realms of the Imperium, have become subjects of legend. But what do the inhabitants of the Imperium really know about these exiles? Are these just myths and folk tales, spun by frightened souls clinging to whatever scraps of hope they can grasp? Or could there be a kernel of truth hidden in these stories? Something more than just the fearful ramblings of those who dare not know the truth. The truth, as always in the Imperium, is elusive. The Imperium's leaders, its vast bureaucracies, and its many orders all operate on a need-to-know basis. Secrets are hidden, swept under the rug, and even the most powerful factions are kept in the dark when it suits the purposes of those in power. So when it comes to these exiled factions, whether they be rogue Space Marine chapters, disillusioned regiments of the Imperial Guard, or even factions of the Adeptus Mechanicus, what is known? What do the common folk, the soldiers on the front lines, and the distant worlds actually understand about these exiles? The answer is complicated and often wrapped in uncertainty. For the average Imperial citizen, the idea of whole factions of the Imperium disappearing into the unknown is nothing short of a horrifying myth. The stories that circulate among the lower ranks of the Astra Militarum in the markets and taverns of Imperial worlds paint these exiled forces as traitors, heretics, and worse. Whispers speak of powerful war bands, once proud and noble warriors, now living in the darkest corners of space, their loyalty to the Emperor long since abandoned. These rumors carry the stink of fear, the fear that the Imperium's enemies are not just lurking in the shadows, but that the Imperium's own warriors, once the very embodiment of the Emperor's will, might now be its greatest threat. Some say these exiled forces are the hidden hands behind some of the galaxy's greatest atrocities, secretly pulling the strings of chaos and war from the shadows. But how much of this is true? How much of it is the result of the Imperium's own propaganda, designed to demonize those who have dared to escape its grasp? The truth, as always, is likely more complicated. The Imperium, for all its might, is not a flawless empire. Its politics are rife with corruption, and its leadership is often detached from the realities of life in the far reaches of space. Could it be that these exiled factions were once loyal servants of the Emperor, but over time became disillusioned with the very system they were built to protect? Could they have fled not out of betrayal, but out of a deep sense of disillusionment, driven by the understanding that the Imperium they served had lost its way? In the eyes of many in the Imperium, the mere fact of their exile is enough to condemn them. And so the stories grow more distorted, more embellished with each telling. In the whispering halls of the Administratum and the dark recesses of the Imperial Palace, the tales of these exiles have taken on a life of their own. They are no longer seen as fallen heroes, but as monsters, cursed beings who abandoned their duty and betrayed the Emperor. Some even speak of them as if they were lost to chaos itself, corrupted and twisted into something unrecognizable. It's easy to see why the common man might believe these rumors. The Imperium has spent so much time hiding its own failures, erasing its own mistakes, that the truth has become lost in the fog of history. But that's the problem with myths. They are often based on a shred of truth. Could it be that these stories, these whispers, have been distorted over time, but still carry echoes of the real events that led to the exiles' flight? There are many who believe that some of these exiled factions still cling to the ideals they once served, still fighting to protect humanity in their own way, free from the shackles of the Imperium's decaying rule. These people believe that, deep in the unexplored reaches of space, these forces have not become monsters but survivors, battered by years of war and isolation, but still holding on to something more than just blind loyalty. Perhaps in the end, they are not so different from the Imperium itself. Just as the Imperium once rose from the ashes of the Age of Strife, so too could these exiles be building something new, something that might one day challenge the Imperium's vision for the galaxy. Fan theories often delve into the possibility that the truth of these exiles is far more complicated than the Imperium would have its people believe. Some suggest that the Imperium's enemies are not the only ones to blame for the galaxy's suffering, that perhaps these exiled forces were, in some way, victims of the Imperium's own failings. Perhaps they were the ones who fought in the Emperor's name, only to be betrayed by a system that no longer valued the very ideals they upheld. Some fans believe that these exiled forces might even have been the true heirs of the Emperor's original vision, an idea that has been distorted and twisted by centuries of corruption and political manipulation. Could they be the true protectors of humanity, cast aside by the Imperium that once relied on them? The idea that these exiled factions are not monsters but rather misunderstood warriors is an appealing one for many. It offers hope that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy there is still a flicker of light, a chance that the very forces the Imperium has cast aside could one day rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. Whether or not this is true, however, remains a mystery. What we do know is that the Imperium's stories about these exiled factions are not the full truth. The legends, rumors, and whispers are merely pieces of a larger puzzle, one that will likely remain unsolved for as long as the Imperium clings to its secrets. At the end of the day, the truth about these exiles, about their fate and their actions, is locked away, hidden behind layers of myth and propaganda. The tales we hear in the dark corners of the Imperium are just that, tales. Some of them may hold grains of truth, some may be wild exaggerations, but the reality is far more complex than any of us can truly know. What we can say for certain is that these exiled factions, if they even exist, remain a powerful symbol of the Imperium's fractured state. Whether they are still out there, still surviving, is a mystery, but the myths surrounding them will likely continue to haunt the Imperium for centuries to come. And perhaps, in the end, the only thing that matters is that these exiles, whether they are heroes or traitors, are a reminder of the dark, secretive heart of the Imperium itself. If the Imperium were to ever discover the existence of these rogue forces, the galaxy would undoubtedly face a reckoning unlike any it has seen before. The very idea of exiled Imperial factions, whether they are rogue Space Marine chapters, disgraced regiments of the Astra Militarum, or hidden factions of the Adeptus Mechanicus, living in the far reaches of the galaxy, is an uncomfortable one for the Imperium. These forces, once the Emperor's most loyal servants, have vanished from the records, their names erased from history, their loyalties forgotten. But if the Imperium ever learned of their survival, what would it do? Would it seek to bring them back into the fold, to restore these exiles to their former glory? Or would the Imperium view them as traitors, branded for their abandonment and punished for their betrayal? The Imperium, at its core, is a place of unforgiving rigidity. Loyalty to the Emperor and to the Imperium is the highest commandment, and to betray that loyalty is considered one of the gravest sins. There's little room for mercy, and even less for understanding. The Inquisition, the Administratum, and even the common citizens of the Imperium all view defection as treasonous, an act of heresy that cannot be tolerated. For any force to break away from the Imperium, no matter the reasons or the circumstances, is seen as an affront to the very foundation of the Imperium itself. And once an Imperial force is marked as a traitor, the full weight of the Emperor's wrath would come crashing down upon them. In the event that the Imperium discovered the existence of these rogue factions, there would be no hesitation in declaring them enemies of the state. The Imperium's first instinct would undoubtedly be to eliminate the threat, to purge these exiles from the galaxy once and for all. The sheer power of the Imperium's military forces, its fleets, its armies, its Inquisition, would be brought to bear with ruthless efficiency. The very idea that these exiled factions, who had once sworn loyalty to the Emperor, could now pose a threat to the Imperium would be an intolerable stain on the Imperium's honor. The might of the Imperial Navy, the overwhelming force of the Space Marines, and the relentless tactics of the Astra Militarum would all be mobilized to destroy these rogue forces, to ensure that their rebellion did not spread and that no other factions would follow in their footsteps. But there's a darker side to the Imperium's reckoning, one that fans have speculated about in many discussions over the years. The Imperium is a galaxy-spanning empire, and over the millennia, it has become a place of political intrigue, corruption, and decadence. Not every faction within the Imperium is as loyal as it seems. The Adeptus Mechanicus, for example, has long been known to play its own game, operating in the shadows and often putting its own interests ahead of those of the Emperor. Could it be that some factions within the Imperium would see the return of these exiled forces not as a threat, but as an opportunity? What if certain factions, whether motivated by power, resources, or the lust for ancient technology, would seek to bring the exiles back, to forge alliances with them, and use their strength to further their own agendas? Could some Imperial forces, seeing the exiles' power, knowledge, and military prowess, decide that bringing them back into the fold is more beneficial than simply eliminating them? The intrigue and political maneuvering within the Imperium is far from straightforward, and it's not difficult to imagine certain factions quietly supporting the exiles for their own reasons, hoping to use them to shift the balance of power within the Imperium. The Inquisition, however, would never allow such an alliance to come to fruition. The Inquisition's role is clear. It is the Imperium's hammer, wielding unyielding justice against those who would threaten the Emperor's rule. And to them, the existence of these rogue factions would be nothing short of heresy. If the exiles were ever discovered, the Inquisition would waste no time in mobilizing its forces to hunt them down, rooting them out with extreme prejudice. There would be no negotiation, no attempt at reconciliation. The Exiles, the heretical chapters, the traitorous regiments, none of them would be allowed to remain in the galaxy, not while the Imperium's purity was at stake. The Inquisition's zealous nature would demand nothing less than total annihilation, a purging of these rogue elements to ensure that the Imperium's unbroken loyalty to the Emperor is maintained. But what if these exiled forces had grown too strong? What if they had adapted, surviving in the far reaches of the galaxy, building alliances with alien races or even chaos factions? The situation becomes even more complicated. The Imperium might find itself facing a force that it cannot easily crush, a force that has grown in power and numbers over time. Would the Imperium continue its campaign of extermination, even if it meant fighting a war on two fronts? Or would it see the Exiles as a necessary evil, a force to be used in the ever-spiraling conflict with the enemies of mankind? Could the Imperium, in its desperation, reach out to these exiles, offering them a chance to return, but on their terms? Fans have speculated that, were the Imperium to discover the rogue factions, it could eventually reach a point where the question of their return becomes less about justice and more about pragmatism. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and the Imperium's power has waned in certain areas. Perhaps in the distant future, the Imperium would be forced to reconsider its position on these exiled forces. Could there be a situation where, facing down the forces of chaos, the Orcs or the Tyranids, the Imperium might turn to the Exiles as a desperate measure, bringing them back into the fold not because of loyalty, but because of sheer necessity? But that possibility seems far off. For now, the Imperium's stance would likely remain one of uncompromising purity. Exiles would be seen as traitors, their existence a threat to the Imperium's fragile sense of unity. And so, the reckoning would come, swift, brutal, and unforgiving. The Imperium would bring its full wrath to bear on these rogue factions, hoping to stamp out the seed of rebellion before it could take root and spread. But in the end, the question remains: could the Imperium ever truly erase the legacy of these exiles? Could their survival in the far reaches of the galaxy be more than just a myth, more than just a forgotten story? Only time will tell, and the galaxy's reckoning will echo through the ages. As we draw this discussion to a close, the question remains: are there truly Imperial forces hiding in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, beyond the reach of Terra and the Emperor's light? The idea of rogue factions, exiled Space Marine chapters, or disillusioned regiments of the Imperial Guard. Living in the dark corners of space is both thrilling and terrifying. For centuries, the Imperium has been the shining beacon of humanity's will, its light meant to guide the galaxy through the darkness. But that light, as we've seen, is far from unbreakable. The Imperium is a flawed empire, one built on centuries of war, betrayal, and corruption. And in that darkness, could these exiled factions have found a place to survive, to rebuild, and perhaps even to thrive? The idea of these rogue forces existing in the galaxy is one that speaks to the very heart of the Warhammer 40K universe, a universe full of mystery, betrayal, and the haunting question of what lies beyond the Imperium's grasp. These exiled factions, whether they chose to flee or were forced into exile by the crushing weight of the Imperium's bureaucracy, could be living in the furthest reaches of space, their existence a closely guarded secret. Could they have formed their own society, one that rejects the oppressive laws of the Imperium and embraces a new way of life? Could they have made alliances with alien races, learned forgotten technologies, and built something new from the ashes of their former loyalty to the Emperor? The mystery surrounding these exiled factions only grows deeper when you consider the potential implications for the Imperium. What would happen if the Imperium ever discovered their existence? Would they seek to bring them back into the fold, offering a chance for redemption and reconciliation? Or would they view them as traitors, to be hunted down and purged for their disloyalty? The very idea of the Imperium's greatest warriors, once its most loyal soldiers, turning against the Emperor and fleeing into the unknown is a concept so unsettling that it has become the stuff of legend. But is it a myth? Or is there a kernel of truth buried beneath the surface of these stories? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. As fans, we love to speculate, to imagine what might be hiding in the uncharted corners of the galaxy. Could these exiled forces still be out there, waiting for the right moment to strike, or have they long since vanished into myth? We may never know for sure. What we do know, however, is that the very concept of these rogue factions challenges everything we think we know about loyalty, honor, and duty in the Warhammer 40K universe. It forces us to question what happens when the lines between right and wrong become blurred, when the heroes of the Imperium are left with no choice but to turn away from the Empire they swore to protect. As we wrap up this discussion, we are left with more questions than answers. Are these exiled forces real, or are they just the stuff of myth and legend? The possibilities are endless, and that is what makes them so fascinating. The mystery of these rogue factions, their fate, and their potential impact on the Imperium adds another layer to the already complex and intricate tapestry of the Warhammer 40K universe. Whether they are seen as traitors, survivors, or something more, these exiles remain one of the most tantalizing mysteries in the galaxy, and the fact that we don't have all the answers only makes them more intriguing. If you've enjoyed exploring the hidden corners of Warhammer 40K lore with me, be sure to subscribe for more insights into the darkest, most mysterious aspects of this vast universe. From the secrets of the Lost Legions to the whispers of rogue Space Marine chapters, we'll continue to dig deeper into the untold stories of the 41st millennium. There's always more to uncover, more to explore, and more to imagine. So join me again as we journey into the unknown, where the secrets of the galaxy await.